The price of Bitcoin has been held down for a long time. We should have reached this point around 100,000 a few years ago. But FTX and other companies were really the ones who stole the $100,000 from Bitcoin in 2021, if you look at how much fraud they did. We were supposed to be there, but they took it away from us. It all fell apart. We also found out that FTX was selling Bitcoin that they didn't even have. The only thing it does is sell fake Bitcoin that didn't exist. It's also possible that other groups did the same thing. After everything was clear, Bitcoin crashed because people lost faith in it. We got back on our feet, but we still had to figure out what was going on with GBDC, which is related to the first theft. This time Barry Silbert's group, DCG, and Genesis are the only ones left. So that's still being worked out. I think this is why there wasn't a lot of noise when the ETFs first came out. But if you look closely, it's very clear that the ETFs are causing a huge amount of demand that's constantly going up. And that will happen faster than any untangling of. Genesis and DCG are now committing theft. All of that being said, and the fact that we're pretty much at, based on the past all-time highs before the halves, I don't think it's impossible that we'll see 1 million this year. Mow said that all that is needed for Bitcoin prices to go up a little is a small hole in the system. This crack will show the more than 8 billion people who live in the world that the current money system is not only broken, it's set up to fail. Mow thinks this crack will start in the US bond market. The US bond market was once thought to be the best financial market in the world, but it is now more volatile than a number of other asset classes. Critics have said that Mow's predictions are especially unlikely to come true now that global macro conditions and rising international tensions are making things more difficult. But the CEO of Jan 3rd says that these very things will cause Bitcoin's price to go straight to $1 million when the time comes. Mow recently talked with podcaster and journalist Efrat Fenixson about the idea of hyper-Bitcoinization, the chance of sovereign adoption of Bitcoin, and his prediction that Bitcoin would be worth $1 million. I think that hyper-Bitcoinization is going to happen. We're just trying to speed things up a bit by getting the nation-states on board. From January 3rd to January 10th, we work with governments, lawmakers, regulators, and central banks too, if they're willing to talk. We're working with them to help them set up a Bitcoin plan because our main idea is that we are going to a state where Bitcoin is used a lot. That's the last thing to do. But first, there needs to be a change from the paper system to this new one. A lot of countries don't seem to be ready either. Besides that, I think this change will happen very quickly. It's not going to be decades away. Most likely, it will happen in the next 5 to 10 years. Really? Yes. A lot of places aren't ready for this change because of this. A lot of people will suffer because they aren't ready for that change, like when money was taken away from people in the past. If you look at India in 2016, they stopped using some of their money. A lot of people died. During this very rough demonetization event, about 12 people died. And it's only taking a few bills out of circulation, but there were lines at the bank. Some were dying from the weather. Some people couldn't pay their medical bills because they still had old bills to pay. The hospital wouldn't take the old bills because they thought they wouldn't be worth anything. When you apply that to the whole world, though, you find that about 8 billion people still need to join Bitcoin. And we're not ready to do that at all. El Salvador is pretty well ready. They each have their own national pocket. They have some tools for learning. People are being taught in schools. And they have a law about Bitcoin. But some places aren't ready. We want to help with that and get Bitcoin used in some way right now so that they have a few years to move smoothly into Bitcoin as a sidetrack to fiat and be ready for when fiat dies. We try to get people to adopt Bitcoin by giving them benefits that are in line with Bitcoin. This also fits with digging in general. They don't have the money or the means to build hydroelectric dams, geothermal plants, and other energy-generating facilities if they have extra energy. This is true for many growing poor countries around the world. We check to see what they need. If they need things like roads, airplanes, or other infrastructure. A hospital. They have energy that isn't being used or that is just being wasted, so they could mine Bitcoin and pay for those things with Bitcoin. That's what we give to the government. We check with them to see what they need and what we can do to make the rewards work together. It's also possible that they want to get rid of flare gas sites because they have ESG goals. You can mine Bitcoin to do that. In this case, we just try to figure out all the puzzle parts that interest them and go from there. We don't talk about games and other things that are very Bitcoin-like because I think it will scare them. The CEO of Jan, 3 uses the Freedom Van protests in 2022 as an example of how the Canadian government went too far. The government led by Justin Trudeau called the Emergencies Act an extraordinary piece of federal legislation. This gave the government more power, which it then used to violate people's rights. The banks are also happy to help freeze the leaders' personal accounts, which means they can't use their banks without permission from the courts. Mow says that when the big fiat Ponzi scheme starts to fall apart, many other countries will act in the same cruel way. They will take all homes and assets in the system and do anything else to stop the people from taking control. Here are some more interview clips. I believe that countries are still made up of people in the end. And governments can be bad if they have bad or weak people in charge, like Trudeau. And there are many cases of this. There are, however, good people in the government who want the best for the people they lead. But I think the part about Bitcoin being used is very important. This is why a lot of us are motivated to do our job around January 3rd. Because Bitcoin could change the government, changing the relationship between the government and a citizen of the government so that you're not just a tax slave but also someone who needs to be valued and listened to. After all, they can't just take your stuff now, can they? No longer is it possible to make money. When there is inflation, money is printed in secret. It's not known by many. Inflation, on the other hand, can be used to print money. You can directly tax people or tax them indirectly by making prices go up. With Bitcoin, you can't do that either. And most people would never agree with a lot of the bad policies that the government makes. Let's talk about the ArriveCan scam, or ArriveScam as it's now known. What is that? During COVID, they had an app where you had to mark as vaccinated and keep it up to date every time you entered or left Canada. Okay, they also spent $84 million on an app that did nothing more than log data. And it was just recently found out that the CEO of ArriveCan worked for the government at the National Defense Department of Defense. In other words, there is a lot of fraud, and I think Bitcoin can fix it all. But the point is that states can hurt people in many ways. However, Bitcoin makes that impossible because you need to ask people to put up money, whether it's for war or ArriveCan or something else. That's not how people would agree to spend their money. I think it brings the force back into balance. But not everyone can walk away and vote. For whatever reason, some people have to stay. There's also the question, can you leave too? Because COVID taught us that moving around can be stopped. So I believe we need to work with the governments at some point. We can't just run away. We can only go to a certain number of places. It's possible for all of us to run away to El Salvador. What will happen to El Salvador then? If every country is a fiat country run by people who make money and we're all in El Salvador, they could just nuke us or something. Okay, so we need to fight back and work to get more people on board with Bitcoin. And I think we'll get there just because we have to. A government needs money at the end of the day. If your money is empty, how can you keep an army ready to defend you if you can't pay the soldiers? In the past, there have been times when the government just couldn't pay the troops. You might need Bitcoin if the forces want it. So they have to have good money for the sake of the whole country. This is why many countries buy gold. They know that fiat money is just a game that can fall apart at any time. That's the reason they buy gold. To sum up, Bitcoin is just gold 2.0. That's all the important crypto news for today. Stay tuned for more news, analysis, and views from the world of cryptocurrencies. Tell us what you think in the space below. Please like this movie and subscribe to our channel to see more fun videos.